Hey, everybody, David Bloom with Next TMT Talks, this here podcast with my colleague Daniel Frankel and co-founder. Here for our midweek check-in with Media Play News, our partners. It is impossible to talk about the media business right now without talking a little bit about one of the most popular shows of the last 6 decades, 60 Minutes. We're going to talk 20 minutes on 60 Minutes to see what the heck is going on and where it might go. I find it very interesting to think about where it's going to go. All the Sturm und Drang, as they like to say in Germany, is hardly surprising given Bari Weiss's, remit to screw things up in every way she possibly can with the news business, but it has reached a new fever pitch. Daniel, what are your thoughts about the situation now that the majority of the correspondents have departed the building at 60 Minutes?
Well, I think there's to start off with kind of a reckoning of what Scott Pelley did. Was it the right move with Nick Bilton making his introduction to staff with he had bagels with cream cheese?
Oh,
I
that'll set
understand
anybody off. Ugh,
there were
if they're
lots
bad
too.
bagels, and like if the lox is not really Nova, boo, that alone,
No, I mean,
disrespect.
dude went right at him, but I feel like we're making this assumption that there might be honest intentions here. To Scott Pelley and to the traditional 57-year ethos of the show itself, you call it like you see it. And we all know what this is. We all know the
Yeah,
direction it's
it's
going.
very on brand, right? I mean, what Pelly is very on brand for Pelly, who I have known from a distance since we were both in Dallas in the late '80s, and he was a local news anchor. So this is Scott Pelly times X, right? I mean, times a bunch, but totally on brand for him and everything CBS and 60 Minutes aspired to, right? So
So it's definitely the next level of escalation. You had drip by drip, starting with the resignation of the longtime executive producer. When was that? 2 years ago, or right before Ellison closed on?
right before the deal came
Right.
through, yeah.
And
So
then
he was
Tanya
like,
Simon
I
taking over.
can't do the work anymore. It's not possible. They put Tanya Simon in, another long timer. She'd been there mostly like a quarter century, roughly. So it was that.
And Pelly hinted about the weekly tug of war, and it wasn't just the CCOT segment. There was probably a lot of backstory and a lot of
Yeah.
intervention that just led to this. The question for me is, he called it like he sees it. He's gone now. I don't know if he'll, like Sharon Alfonsi, pursue a lawsuit or not, but he is out there in the market as Sharon Alfonsi is, as Miss Vega is. There's a lot of talent out there that used to be associated with that television show, which is a hit still. Over 6 million viewers on average last season, sixth among all television shows on broadcast. In its 57th season, not bad. It's still a viable thing. The cast or the correspondents are generally pretty old. Alfonsi, I think, was the spring chicken at 54. The demographic
Particularly after the departure of Anderson Cooper, who I think is roughly in that same age bracket. So yeah.
The demographic is ancient. It could be Nick Bilton, who is coming in to oversee the operation. He's not wrong in that it could be updated to meet the modern consumption patterns of today's video viewer, for sure. But they were still making very relevant content. And
Very relevant money. Right,
right,
there was no
nobody talks about the
conversation
money.
about, it was costing 30 million more than it took to make it. I mean, it cost 30 million more to make it than we were bringing in. They were a top 5 show, have been for 40 years, 50 years now. It's the thing people watched after they watched the CBS NFL game every week, right?
Right.
So,
Nobody for 57 years touched this thing. When they did, they made a Michael Mann. What was that movie that when CBS tried to
The
intervene?
Insider, the brilliance in The Insider, yeah.
Was that the Pentagon Papers? I forgot what the
No,
central
that
theme.
was about big tobacco.
Right. That's right. So it used to mean enough that it was a major cinematic event when somebody from the network intervened. It was largely untouched. It was a pristine model for how great broadcast journalism could be. I watched as a kid. I was
And by the way, it was really a separate unit within CBS News. It was off doing its own thing. Its EP was running things like a personal fiefdom, but it was very specifically its own thing, right? With this grand tradition going back to people that knew Edward R. Murrow, Mike Wallace, et cetera, who were in the room with Murrow in the 50s and 60s. So, you know.
We come from a special kind of journalism. We've covered Hollywood, both you and I. We know how hard it is to tell a story. We've worked in trade journalism, and even in this endeavor, it's a creator economy thing with a lot of independence, but compromises attempt to be made. We want advertisers, and we don't want to. There are certain people we don't want to piss off. It's just the way it is. 60 Minutes
And there's
flew
other
above that.
people. Look out, buddy.
There was nobody they would. It felt like, and I don't think we were misled in its purest sense, its best days, and that was most of them. It was uncompromising. If you got up in front of
But
Morley Safer and you tried to
but
build the
we need
bullshit,
to move on. Yes, it was all of that stuff. That's great. And now it's going through an inflection point. More than half of its correspondents are gone. We have a new guy with no background in broadcast news. He's apparently helped create some documentaries. Good on you, Nick. And he was a print technology writer, a pretty good one, whose stuff I've read. He was fine with that stuff, which puts him about even with me in terms of the stuff he knows. His diagnosis of needing different kinds of content to serve different kinds of audiences beyond the admittedly ossified audience of broadcast TV and Fox News as a whole isn't wrong. It's exactly what Mark Thompson at CNN was talking about 4 or 5 years ago when they brought him in to fix all the mess that was over there. And they have shifted from being broadcast first to being a digital format that cares less about ratings, which is handy when they're still getting their ass kicked by Fox News, but also is much more forward looking about where that goes. So the question is, does that even make sense, though, that diagnosis for 60 minutes, for the specific thing 60 minutes is? I'm not sure that does. And I'm not sure that, again, in the immortal words of Brendan Carr, we can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way. They're doing it the hard way this week. They're firing all these people. Probably other people will depart. I think you said to me something from the Puck guy at an interview saying, the whole staff's going to be gone within weeks. Well, probably quite a lot of it. And then there'll be other people saying, I could use a job. Either they're on the outside looking for something and they'll remake this. The question is, when you remake it, is it 60 minutes? Is it more like 32 minutes? Is it like 60 seconds? Like for TikTok? What does it look like? And what
right?
kind of journalism does it do? Right? What kind of journalism can it do? And what kind of journalism should it be trying to do? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many original sins. Let's just put it back to Telefonzi. I mean, this whole thing was so mishandled. Why did Sharon Alfonsi have to go? Why did Tanya Simon have to go? I mean,
Well, they got into fights with the new leadership, and that's not approved or allowed. It also suggests a certain snowflake delicacy of spirit among people who've made their
right,
livings mocking left-wing snowflakes. But that being said, that's just what it is. Beyond that, though, you know, I I understand from my spouse that MS Now and Rachel Maddow suggested to Scott Pelley, "Hey, come on over, brother. We got room for you." To me, he's like a spot on imitation of Lawrence O'Donnell, who's already got, I think, the 10 o'clock hour nailed down. But Scott Pelley coming on would be a get for MS Now and make a lot of sense as that all news service tries to figure out, big names. Rachel only comes on once a week now and produces the show that I think Jen Psaki otherwise
right.
occupies. But, it would be another star and one, shall we say, newly motivated, which could be very interesting. You speculated about Netflix, and I'm like, maybe,
Well,
but
I
I
mean,
don't know. Netflix doesn't want to do daily news. They're like that. That's not what we're doing. We're doing, Charlemagne the God in the morning, but he's already doing a podcast. He's for 3 hours. We're just going to run it. That's what we're doing. We're not going to bring all the 60 Minutes dudes over and do stuff.
yeah,
So
I was going to get to that, but I guess what I brought up Alfonsi for It showed that there was never an honest intention to try to make it work. They knew there would be friction with this group. The intention always was to overhaul it and bring it to heel, in my view. And we kind of knew it a year ago. It shouldn't be as surprising as it is. It's just the inevitable conclusion. I brought Netflix because you just had your own business opportunity kind of influenced by the federal government. Maybe the federal government opened up an opportunity for you here, as opposed to shut one down. Here you have this prestigious brand that gets great advertisers, that's clean as a whistle, and you have all the talent there. Certainly, you can't call it 60 Minutes, but people will know what it is. Call it 1 hour, whatever. You're not in the news business, true, but what a great way to enter it with a timely broadcast that people would tune in largely all at once to see. You're trying to eventize your business a little bit. Falls
Well,
directly.
they might. I mean, news has never been that, though. I mean, I think you're talking about an audience and viewing habits from a different era. So if they just say chunk these guys out and put them over here and say do what you do, I don't think an audience that knows how to turn on Netflix is necessarily going to tune in. They're going to be watching One Piece or Bridgerton or an NFL game in Rio de Janeiro or whatever. I don't I don't think that happens in that way. I think that all gets broken up. But I do think MS Now, for instance, does have some motivation to pick up a couple of these folks and do something with them at some level. Some of them might just retire or go back to being the equivalent of what Kathleen Kennedy did after running Star Wars into the ground and become an independent producer and do their thing with their team and do some projects, some documentary projects on long form stuff and sell it to Netflix or sell it to whomever. But Netflix and HBO are your obvious suspects. So HBO is now going to be part of the Ellison maw. So I think that's probably more likely for those folks, realistically.
I know. I think there's a lot of talent there. It would make sense for Scott Pelley to end up under the Versant umbrella. Sure, there's a scatter to the wind likelihood to all this, but if you coalesce it, if you take all of the alumni from that show and the considerable goodwill among folks who have influence and ability to do things, it seems like there's a prestige brand that may skew a little older, but nonetheless is
A
highly.
little.
It doesn't.
I
I
mean,
was
you need a walker to watch that show, for
I
God's
was under the
sakes.
belief that it wasn't the souffle that was the problem. It was the people who were in charge of merchandising it. You could have taken 60-minute segments, made them vertical, put them anywhere. You could have. There's tons of things that Bari Weiss was serious about modernizing. That was her job, to take the existing portfolio content and chop it up the way it needs to be chopped up. I'll bet Tanya Simon wasn't in the way of that. The issue is much deeper. We need to make the president feel like we're hurting you, act hurt.
Right. Because they
So
still got a deal that's still not absolutely certain. They're still collecting stuff from the Department of Justice, still collecting information to sign off on things that they fast tracked already, but they've got to do due diligence, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, that's all true. I think that what will happen is we will have something, a very different take on 60 Minutes. I have a hard time believing that the future of 60 Minutes is anything close to what it's been. And then the question becomes, is this another example of a Bari Weiss fail because she's unable to work with the talent and is just pulling straight ahead with an ideological makeover designed to appease a single specific audience member? And
it's not.
out
I
of
mean,
that,
I think from the lens with that she got paid $150 million for, it's not a failure at all. She was called in to whack some people, and she's done her job.
so we'll call her the godmother. Is that what we're gonna
Call
call
her
her from
what you
now on?
will, but she's on one metric succeeding wildly. It was a dirty job. Somebody had to do it. They paid her a lot of money. The free press wasn't worth $150
And
million.
Bilton, by the way, got apparently a very rich contract too. Fine, that's the kind of job that pays very well still, even if it's a ghost of what it might have been a few years ago. But all that being said, you mentioned Netflix. I didn't want to lose track. By the way, just today, Netflix's shares continue to drop for the eighth straight day to $81 a share. And this despite the fact that they're no longer spending $111 billion to buy Warner Brothers. And yet their shares keep going. It was a bad day on the market for lots and lots of companies, including a bunch that have been going like insane. And
Right.
the market finally said, well, maybe we need to bring this in a little bit. But Netflix is getting hammered. I mean, it's down at 81. It was like 125
Right.
before they made a run last end of last June. I think it was like 121 or something like that. And now it's a full third below that. That's a lot. And this is after getting to $2.8 billion in goodbye money and not spending a whole lot, a couple hundred million or whatever it was on all their legal fees and stuff, but inconsequential amount for a company that size. And no longer having, talk about old media weights on your feet. It doesn't have those, and yet it's getting hammered. So it's sort of interesting to watch some of that. It's like, what are they going to do?
I think, like you said, everything is getting hammered this week. The global economy is in an iffy state right now. There's a war going on, and gas
It
is,
seems like it's picking up again, and gas is still at $6 a
yeah,
gallon in
I don't know how much you
Southern
can infer into
California.
it. It's a consumer-facing business, and I think
Right,
anything that, you know,
right. Well, does it change things for the streaming business if even Netflix, the gotta have of all the streaming services, if even they are seeing their shares get hammered? I'm really going to be interested to see what happens in the next quarter for signups and churn and all that stuff, what they're going to be able to speak to, and what it means for all the other services that have been raising prices, right? Like, what's that going to look like with or without Scott Pelley working for him? So I think it's going to be a really, it could be a very complicated post peak TV, post streaming wars time for all the services which are trying to get to making money and make up for the continued decline of broadcast and cable and have been raising their rates fairly aggressively, I think. It's going to be really fascinating to see how if stuff starts getting cut, insurance starts going up.
I don't know. I mean, if getting your time machine, I'm sure you have one, go back like 500 days, and you've got a still growing economy, a
That's
stock
called my
market.
fading memory, Dan. That's not a time machine. That's my fading brain, vaguely recalling that 500 days ago, I was dating somebody named Summer. No, no, that was a movie. Never mind. It was Zoe Deschanel.
Yeah, I think,
500 Days
maybe
of Summer.
50,000 days ago. I don't know. But, we still had 60 Minutes, we still had Stephen Colbert, we still had a good economy. A lot has changed since, I don't know,
Don
January
Trump
20th.
is, yeah, Don Trump's an agent of change, and some of that change has been less positive than others of it, let's just
What do you
say.
think has been positive? Is there one piece of
Yeah, no, I
positive?
think there's definitely some stuff that got busted up. The Europeans are paying more for their own defense, as are the Asian folks. I think that's appropriate. They should be paying more instead of just us. I think that's useful.
So the notion of American soft power and the ability to make decisions and control how we control the world the way we want to see it in our kind of moral standing in the world. There was a price for that.
I didn't. Yeah, there was a price for that. It was a very expensive price, and I don't know if you noticed this. We have $29 trillion in debt, which does add up and may affect someday. You may want to retire. I know you love work.
Oh, no,
You love this,
we're in debt. I don't I Here's the thing that I can't we're not in any less debt, we're in far more debt now.
right? But
So,
bottom line is every even a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while,
I
as
would
my
argue that
grandmammy used to say.
we're the acorn hasn't lifted off yet. We haven't got off the schneid for one accomplishment, I would argue. Ebola is exploding in Africa. There's just no good news to report right now. So we don't have to get too political, but, just not for nothing. It's time somebody said something, right? Sure.
Markets up, you know.
I'll write it down.
Speaking of which, the Trump administration did finally issue some AI rules, which way overdue. They finally, they were going to just go to town, do whatever you want. We got to keep up. We got to stay ahead of the Chinese or the world will end. To holy crap, this mythos thing from Anthropic is really powerful and found 20-year-old 0-day exploits. And we gotta figure out what to do with that. And then a thing that had a 90-day, there was an executive order that called for like a 90-day review period. And then they pulled that back because that was perceived as being too hands-on by the government. And now it's a 30-day review period, which is a little bit closer to the speed of all the stuff that's coming out from these AI
I know
companies right
it
now.
feels haphazard, blown by the wind. It doesn't feel like any kind of policy making grounded in any kind of understanding of what the market dynamics are and the possible consequences of letting this thing go unhindered.
There's a
AI,
lot of reactive stuff, yes.
yeah, it's just an unhinged period where even actual regulatory action doesn't feel thoughtful. Okay, we'll get off this elephant in the room. What else you got, Dave?
I also saw a really fun conversation with the CEO of one of the major one of the major options operator, CME, Terry Duffy, just ranting about the prediction markets and how illegal they are as they are regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which
Yeah.
has been, shall we say, rather hands off as prediction markets
See, we
have.
can't escape it.
It's a big deal, and we'll see how this plays out because I think this is going to be one of those things where they kind of just wave something through, don't bother to dot the i's. The courts go, we got rules for this stuff, and you guys aren't following any of them, and that's got to stop. And so it'll be interesting to see what that means for all the companies that run prediction markets, two of which have a Trump son involved either as investors or consultants or both. It'll be interesting to see what it means for them, but it also will be interesting to see what it means to circle back to media. If prediction markets are pulled off the table and are no longer advertising as heavily on sports, which they do because the majority of their prediction market bets are about sports. So that will be fascinating to track and what that means for the business of sports television.
Only there
See,
was an
I can bring this back.
unflinching
I can bring this back. I did it. Look at that. Relevancy. That's me,
right.
Mr. Relevant.
Not bad, not bad. If only there was an unflinching news magazine with pedigree and skill that could summarize this for us.
Yeah, it
At
only
a point in
takes 4
time,
months for them to do the piece, but that's fine, whereas we, with the nimbleness of our youth, are able to pop this stuff out.
we'll write
Um,
some time. And yeah, I'm for our midweek edition, which rolls out at your newsstand on Thursday morning. We're going to look
well,
at
actually, your email box, but that's as close as we get to a newsstand these days, unfortunately. I used to
more
love
YouTube
those.
having a moment stuff, just as Obsession and Backrooms sort of reorients the nexus of the creative pipeline in the entertainment business. You have Neil Mohan and some of YouTube's biggest creator stars on the front door of the Pincy Showbiz Press, specifically Deadline, under the header of awards. They're all gussied up in director's chairs. It's clearly a
Well, this is exactly what I was talking about, though, not that many days ago when I said, look, it's Iron Lung, Obsession, Backrooms. Those are all YouTube creators. Compare that to the 200 and we'll call it 50 million generated so far by the latest Star Wars movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, based on one of their streaming
I know
shows.
we went into this.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So we are kind of again at this nexus point where people are going, oh, these young creators who are just
well,
making stuff, throwing it against the wall. Those guys,
so this is the
you know.
backdrop. There are a number of makers. And we talked to them a few weeks ago. The TBPN, Technology Business Programming Network guys,
Mhm.
the darlings of Silicon Valley. They were in town a few weeks ago, making their
Yep.
rounds for Emmy consideration. It's a very polished show. So emerging formats seems to be the ticket, but who knows where this goes. So that backdrop is there's a Digital Eye is the name of the research company. I was blissfully unaware of them. Maybe you've seen these guys are located in the UK, Bath. They looked at we all know for some time YouTube has been a force in connected TV domestically. It's bigger than anything right now, including Netflix by a lot. But what I didn't know until today was in markets like France and Italy,
India,
it's still
India.
emerging, growing fast. I mean, the US consumption only grew by 3% last year. In France,
Wow.
it was close to 40%. So if it's not
And
in a
they're all still on the Minitel
if it's
in
not in a
France.
mature state of dominance, it's getting there everywhere else. So I thought that was particularly interesting
Yeah,
data.
yeah.
Also, another data point, it over indexes on young females and old men. So we're gonna dive
That's a
into it.
bad combination, I just wanna say, but okay, far be it from me to judge
Uh,
anybody, age gaps, all that stuff,
yeah, I kinda wanna find out what that's all about. So we're gonna go into that study. We'll probably do our
and
60-minute.
possibly old men looking at young women. I'm just gonna throw that out there, but just as a bet. Anyway, we should wrap this puppy up. I am David Bloom with Next TMT Talks, this here podcast, and this guy is Daniel Frankel,
This
my
guy.
co-founder of both Next TMT Talks, the podcast, and Next TMT, the newsletter. This is our midweek check-in with our partners over at Media Play News. Thanks as always to them. Like, share, subscribe, comment. You can get our twice a week newsletter in your email box or newsstand. Apparently, we're now a print publication that Dan has kept from me all this time. At NextTM as in media, T.com, nextTMT.com, and you
It's
can
like a
sign up. It'll
phone book.
show up.
I mean, the ads are just, I have to beat them off with a stick. How'd you find out about
Yeah, you just, it shows up magically. So it's pretty cool. Get it there. Get the podcast on all your favorite purveyors of quality audio and video stuff like YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. With all that, I think we should wrap this puppy up and say thank you for listening. This is David Bloom with Daniel Frankel, over and out.